She fell from the sky wrapped in fire, and Corin Hale's first thought was, well, that's definitely going to mess up lunch. The crater was still steaming when he got there, boots crunching over glassed sand and scorched rock, the smell of ozone sharp enough to bite. His handheld scanner screamed about radiation pockets and unstable plasma residue, but he ignored it, mostly because the device was older than the war itself, and tended to scream about everything, including heat signatures from lizards and his own body odor. The pod was shaped like a dagger half buried, its hull scorched black and cracked open like a broken egg. Faint pulses of cerulean light blinked inside, Ilari tech, no question. He cursed under his breath, just his luck. The war was over, had been for 3 years, but someone up in the cosmos had clearly forgotten to update their calendar. Ilari crash pods didn't show up for fun, and they definitely didn't crash alone. Corin approached with his rifle low and his nerves on fire. The sand around the impact zone was still warm enough to warp the air, and the pod hissed at him like a wounded beast. He stepped carefully over twisted metal, keeping his eyes locked on the dark interior. His breath fogged in the cooler air that radiated from inside the wreck. That's when he saw her. Slumped in the wreckage, half-conscious, armor scorched and sparking at the seams, was an Ilari soldier. She looked almost human, if you ignored the faint luminescence of her skin, the strange gleam of tech veins snaking up her throat, and the long, elven ears that twitched as he drew closer. Her eyes opened a fraction, golden and sharp even through pain. He froze. She didn't move. He waited. She blinked. He finally spoke. "You planning to kill me, or are we having a staring contest?" Her lips parted. Blood trickled from one corner of her mouth. "Can you help me?" she rasped, voice dry as static. "Remove my armor, human." Corin stared, blinked. "That is not what I expected to hear today." Then she passed out. The smart thing to do, the only thing, really, was to leave her. Maybe toss a thermal blanket over the pod out of some dying ember of conscience, then run. He could pretend he never saw the plume of fire in the sky. But Corin Hale had never been particularly smart. Or maybe he was just tired of running from ghosts. Either way, 5 minutes later, he was dragging an unconscious alien through the dust toward his shelter, muttering to himself the whole way. "Can you help me remove my armor?" He grumbled. "Sure, right after I knit you a sweater and braid your hair. Maybe give you a foot massage too, huh?" The bunker wasn't much. Mostly underground, mostly powered, mostly not on fire. That counted as luxury these days. He hauled her onto the old medible and secured the door. Then, hesitantly, he looked her over. The armor was Ilari combat tissue, sleek, dark, fitted like a second skin. Elegant in a terrifying way, not a single seam in sight. Where it was damaged, sparks crackled and soft blue fluid leaked, smelling faintly of coolant and burnt circuitry. He picked up a tool, looked at her, put it down. "Nope," he muttered. "This is how horror movies start." Her eyes fluttered open again, focused on him. "You're not medical," she said. "You think." Her lips twitched, and for a second he thought she was trying to smile. "Tool rack, behind you. Third slot, use the destabilizer." Corin found the tool. It looked like a tuning fork had a baby with a plasma torch, and brought it close to one of the armor seams. She didn't flinch. Brave or just too tired to care. He hesitated. "You sure about this? You people booby-trap your armor. I watched one of your commandos turn into red mist trying to change socks too fast. Localized locks, pressuring coded, you'll be fine, unless you're an idiot." "Oh good," he said, flipping the switch. "We're both doomed." The tool hummed, the armor hissed. Slowly, carefully, it began to part, one section sliding back, revealing bruised flesh beneath. Her skin was paler than he expected, marred by burns and slashes. Scars that told stories he didn't want to hear. He removed a piece, then another. The room smelled like metal and blood. The silence stretched. "You're taking this awfully well," he said eventually. "I'm not in a position to be picky," she murmured. "Besides, you look more like a janitor than a killer." "Rude." He reached for another plate, paused when it pulsed red under his hand. That one's got a charge, she said weakly. You need to disable the primary nexus. Corin's brain itched. Right, of course. Just let me check my How Not to Blow Up an Alien Warrior handbook real quick. But he did as told. With her guidance, he located the small hatch behind her left hip and adjusted the circuit dial to neutral. The plate went dark. The red glow faded. She let out a soft sigh. Better. Glad to hear it. I, for one, was not in the mood to redecorate the ceiling with our body parts. More of the armor slid off, until most of her torso was free. Beneath it, the battle damage was worse than he'd thought. A lattice of old scars cut across her side, intersecting a fresh wound that still bled. His stomach turned, but he kept his hands steady. He worked in silence for a while, patching what he could, stabilizing what he couldn't. When he finally stepped back, she was still awake, watching him. You've done this before, she said, taking off people's clothes, more times than I care to admit. That wasn't a compliment. Didn't sound like one. A faint, exhausted smile curved her lips. Then her head tilted forward and she slumped into a deeper sleep. This time, she didn't wake again. Corin sat down on the floor, back against the wall, letting out a long breath. What the hell was he doing? Bringing an alien soldier into his shelter, stripping her out of tech that could probably kill him if he sneezed wrong, patching her up like she was some poor civilian caught in a crash. But something about her, those eyes, that voice, told him this wasn't just another accident of war. This was something else. Outside, wind howled across the barren landscape, dust devils spinning like ghosts. Inside, Corin rubbed his face, glanced at the sleeping alien and muttered, "Next time I ignore the falling fireball." Definitely. Corin woke to the sound of something humming near his ear, followed immediately by something sharp nudging his throat. His eyes snapped open. There she was, wide awake now, sitting upright on the medible with half her armor removed and a long, thin blade held casually in her hand. The edge looked like it had been carved from starlight, glittering faintly. It was currently pressed right up against his neck, close enough to make his pulse panic. "Well, good morning to you too," he croaked, lifting both hands slowly. "I see we're skipping the part where we say thanks for the life-saving surgery and move straight into homicide." She didn't smile, just tilted her head slightly, ears twitching, golden eyes cool and sharp. "Protocol," she said. "When waking in an unknown environment under unknown custody, verify potential threats immediately." "You know," Corin muttered, "most people just check the weather and make coffee." The blade hovered for another heartbeat, then lowered. She exhaled just a little. "You could have killed me." "Yeah, but that would have meant dragging your glowing corpse back out into the sun. And I have a strict, no heavy lifting before breakfast policy." She studied him. "You're not military." "Nope, not anymore. Not a medic, not a Lari. Not an officer," she frowned. "Why help me?" He shrugged. "I guess I was hoping you'd turn out to be the kind of alien that rewards good behavior with piles of interstellar gold and a spaceship." "I have neither." "Well, then I really messed this one up, did I?" That finally got a reaction. Her lips quirked slightly before she winced, clutching her side. Corin moved instinctively toward her, but she raised the blade again. Lower this time, not aimed to kill, more of a back-off, I bite gesture. "Easy," he said, holding up his hands. "Your wound's still leaking nanofluid. You're gonna want that patched up unless you're trying to grow a third lung." Her eyes narrowed. "That only happened once." He paused. "Wait, that actually—" "You know what, never mind. Not important." Carefully, he stepped to the counter, retrieved a half-functioning medkit, and opened it. The auto-injectors had long since fried themselves into irrelevance, but the skin bond gel still glowed the right shade of green, and the bandage spools hadn't turned into sentient mold yet. That counted as a win. "You're going to need help with this," he said, nodding to her side. She hesitated, then, without lowering the blade, shifted just enough to allow him close. As he applied the gel, her breathing slowed. The stuff burned like acid before it soothed, and she didn't make a sound beyond one sharp intake of air. Corin tried not to look directly at the strange patterns on her skin, where organic tissue met what looked like living circuitry. Just out of curiosity, he said after a beat, is the knife a permanent accessory or is this a temporary trust issue? Standard procedure, she replied, though her grip relaxed. I've had dates go better than this. And those involved spoiled wine and a vegan trying to convert my dinner. Another pause, then, I don't know what vegan means. He glanced up. Oh, you're missing out, it's a human subculture. Kind of like pacifists, but with more tofu and smugness. She made a sound, half breath, half chuckle, but quickly suppressed it. Your species is strange. You should see our music videos. When the wound was sealed and wrapped, she slid the blade back into a hidden slot along her thigh. Corin stepped back and dropped onto a creaky chair. So, you gonna tell me what kind of mission ends with an Alari elite eating dirt on a backwater moon? She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked to the closed bunker door, then back to him. Recon, deep zone. Our fleet was tracking residual signals from an abandoned human comm array. We were redirected mid-flight. There was a detonation. I ejected, landed here. He waited. She added nothing else. That's it, he asked. No thrilling betrayal, no top-secret stolen tech, not even a dramatic monologue. I don't monologue. Shame. You've got the voice for it. Her gaze lingered on him, unreadable. Then she stood slowly, carefully, keeping one hand against the wall for balance. He moved to help her. She waved him off. I need to see the damage to my armor. Yeah, I imagine your warranty's voided. They moved to the workbench, where he'd laid out the pieces he'd removed the night before. The armor still pulsed faintly in places, bits of synthetic fiber writhing like it didn't quite know it had been separated from its wearer. She crouched beside it, fingers tracing the fractured chest plate. Then suddenly she cursed in her native tongue, an odd melodic string of sounds that made the lights flicker. Okay, Corin said, stepping back. Do I need to worry about your voice triggering weapon systems now? Partial memory shards missing, she muttered, ignoring him. It was in this panel, if it detached during the crash. What's a memory shard? She hesitated. It contains localized mission data, communications, targeting history, location markers. So basically your black box. Yes, and it's not here. All right, he said, already dreading where this was going. So if we don't find it, my people will think I compromised. He blinked. You crashed. That's not the same as. They won't care. Corin stared. Remind me never to join your army. She sat back on her heels. You won't have the option. Well, thank the stars for small mercies. There was a long silence after that, filled only by the low hum of power from the bunker's solar cells. Finally, she looked at him again. You live alone here. Yup. No other humans. None worth talking to. Why? He didn't answer right away, picked at a frayed seam in his jacket. Too many ghosts, he said at last. She tilted her head. You mean dead? He nodded. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Another pause. I have ghosts too, she said softly. He looked up. They just walk around still breathing. For once, Corin had nothing funny to say. The quiet stretched between them, filled only by the static hiss of the bunker's old air recycler. Finally, he stood. Well, he said, forcing brightness into his voice, if we're going to find your memory shard before your people decide to turn you into space paste, we'd better start scanning the crash site. She nodded, agreed. Great, he muttered, and here I thought today was going to be boring. She followed him to the door, pausing just before they stepped into the sun-blasted world outside. Human, she said. He glanced at her. Yeah. Thank you. He blinked. For the medical help. For the jokes. He smiled despite himself. You're welcome. I charge per laugh, first one's free. And then they walked out into the heat and dust. Two soldiers who weren't soldiers anymore, chasing a missing shard and trying not to bleed on each other's shadows. Corin poked at the smoldering edge of the crater with the barrel of his rifle and winced as the ground let out a faint hiss, like it was trying to tell him just how dumb an idea that was. Still warm, he muttered. You Alari types really know how to leave an impression. Zura knelt beside the remains of her escape pod, her fingers moving with clinical precision as she pulled aside melted plating and scorched cables. Her armor, now patched with scavenged polymesh, glinted dully under the twin suns. Every motion she made suggested pain carefully tucked beneath discipline. "This section held the memory shard casing," she said, brushing away a fine layer of ashen dust. "But the impact snapped the maglocks. It could have been flung anywhere within a 20-meter radius." Corin frowned. 20 meters of rocky wasteland and buried trash. Fantastic. I'll put on my lucky socks. You wear socks made for luck. I wear socks that don't have holes in them. Same thing. Zura gave him a side glance that might have been amusement or mild confusion. With her, it was always a toss-up. They worked in silence for a while, sifting through twisted debris. Corin used an old magnetic pulse scanner he'd salvaged from a defunct cargo ship. It buzzed and beeped and occasionally flashed error in a variety of rude fonts, but it picked up metallic fragments well enough. Mostly junk, but once a piece of her flight harness, and another time what might have once been a grenade but had since been turned into an extremely unstable paperweight. He tossed it behind a rock before it could start thinking about exploding. Zura was less talkative today, her eyes scanning the terrain with sharp focus. Her steps were lighter now, steadier, but every now and then Corin caught her pausing when she thought he wasn't looking, her hand clutching her side, her breath caught in her throat. "You're pushing it," he said, not looking up. "I'm fine." "You say that like it's supposed to convince me. Pain is data, manageable. You're the most casually terrifying person I've ever met." She didn't argue that. Just then his scanner chirped and lit up blue. "Oh ho," he grinned. "Look who finally decided to be useful. Come on, Magic Stick says there's something 2 meters east." They crossed the stretch of uneven ground, dust kicking up around their boots. The device pinged louder as they closed in on a narrow fissure in the rocks, half covered by a burnt slab of ceramic hull. Corin knelt, pried it loose, and felt a stab of heat rise from the exposed crevice. Inside, partially buried under melted sand and stone, was a shard of tech no larger than a deck of cards, pulsing dimly with a soft cerulean glow. Zura knelt beside him and reached out, then paused. She stared at it, her brow furrowing. Corin glanced at her. "Something wrong." "The shard, it's active." "That's good, right?" "It shouldn't be. The crash would have forced it into inert state. Power cycling means a manual override." "Meaning someone turned it on." "Yes." Corin leaned back. "Oh, good. So maybe we're not the only ones rummaging around out here." Zura's expression darkened. She retrieved the shard, turning it over carefully in her hands. Tiny glyphs flickered across its surface like fireflies caught in a jar. Corin adjusted the rifle slung over his shoulder, suddenly very aware of the wide-open landscape around them. "Any chance you Alari types built your black boxes with some kind of defense system? Exploding memory, disintegration rays, maybe a polite voice that warns intruders?" "No, but if someone's accessing it remotely, they'll know I'm alive." "Right, great, so, does that mean reinforcements or assassins?" She looked up. "That depends." "On what?" "On how much they hate me." Corin blinked. "You're just full of reassuring answers, you know that." They headed back to the shelter with a little more urgency in their steps, keeping low behind the ridgelines and out of view of the high ground. By the time they reached the bunker entrance, the shard had gone dark again, like a sleeping eye. Corin locked the door behind them and dropped his gear with a grunt. Zura placed the shard on the workbench and hooked it into a power port. A faint hum filled the room. Data streamed across a small, cracked screen, glyphs converting themselves into human-readable formats through a translation subroutine Corin had jerry-rigged from an old trade terminal. Most of the file was corrupted, some of it was. Zura scrolled silently, her jaw clenched. Corin moved to stand beside her. "What is it?" "Telemetry, mission logs, orders." "Anything helpful?" "Not yet." She paused. "Wait." She tapped one line and enlarged it. Corin squinted. "That says Command Override Code 3, Nova, what's that?" It's a kill order, level 3, high-value targets only. He raised an eyebrow. Issued to who? Zura didn't answer. She just stared at the screen. Corin frowned. Zura. She turned slowly. Issued for me. Lo. The silence stretched for several long seconds. All right, Corin said finally, clapping his hands together. So, you want coffee? I feel like this is a coffee moment. She looked at him, eyes unreadable. You don't even have real coffee. True, but I do have freeze-dried disappointment in a cracked mug with a picture of a cat holding a rocket launcher. So emotionally, it's basically the same. She didn't laugh, but her expression eased just a little. They marked me as a rogue, she said. They think I defected, or that I saw something I wasn't meant to. Did you? I don't know. Corin poured hot water into 2 cups, dropped in the caffeine sludge packets, and handed her one. She took it without comment. They sat in the bunker's makeshift lounge area, 2 metal crates and a half-broken hollow table with a flickering galaxy projection. Corin kicked up his feet and sipped. So, he said after a minute, any chance you can prove you're not a rogue? Zura stared into her cup. No, the memory shard's logs are too fragmented. Without full data, command will default to the standing order. Corin sighed. And that means they'll keep sending people until you're dead. Yes. He nodded slowly. I see. She looked over at him. I understand if you want me to leave. Oh no, he said, eyes wide. You think I'm missing the chance to get hunted by elite alien assassins in my own backyard? What would I even do with my time? Zura raised an eyebrow. Survive. Where's the fun in that? She gave him the faintest of smirks, then returned her gaze to the flickering shard. Corin leaned back, one hand on his mug. So, what's our next move? We find the rest of the data. There may be a backup, a comm relay or a field beacon. You're saying there's more high-tech alien stuff scattered around out here, and we get to go treasure hunting. In a sense, he grinned, you should have started with that. This is already more exciting than my last 6 years combined. Zura sipped her drink. Your life was very dull, wasn't it? You have no idea. Outside, the desert wind howled against the metal walls, and somewhere far above, satellites turned and listened. The storm rolled in without warning. No dark clouds, no roaring winds, just a sudden pressure shift and the kind of atmospheric crackle that made hair stand on end and tech blink in protest. Corin's coffee trembled on the crate beside him. The lights in the bunker flickered twice, then dimmed to emergency levels. Somewhere in the back, the air recycler let out a wheeze that sounded suspiciously like a mechanical sigh. He looked up from his half-assembled drone. I don't suppose this is a normal part of your alien weather package. Zura glanced at the flickering ceiling. That's not weather. Well, great, he said, setting down his tools. Because nothing says a relaxing afternoon like ominous energy fluctuations. Zura moved to the control console and tapped a series of commands into the aging interface. The screen responded sluggishly. Localized pulse. High altitude, source unknown. Corin leaned over her shoulder. Satellite sweep. Offline. Comms. Jammed. Oh good, so now we're blind and mute. What's next? An interpretive dance battle. She gave him a flat look which he counted as progress. That was practically a chuckle by her standards. The shard on the workbench pulsed faintly again. Zura walked over and tapped it. Still active. Momentarily. That pulse may have triggered residual code. Triggered by who? Corin asked. Zura didn't answer. Her fingers hovered over the shard's surface. Glyphs bloomed briefly across the screen, fragmented data packets, navigation lines, a broken star chart. He frowned. That looks like a tracking path. Partial trajectory, she said. There's something embedded in this data coordinates. To what? She looked up. The backup relay. Corin blinked. Wait, the backup relay. The thing that might clear your name and stop your own people from vaporizing you on sight. Yes. He stared at the screen. Well, don't let me stand in the way of life-saving evidence. Where is it? Zura turned the shard to face him. Here. He squinted. That's just a bunch of numbers. It could be a recipe for a Lari stew. She pointed at a blinking symbol. That ridge, 30 kilometers nor-northeast, embedded in bedrock. Corin whistled low. 30 clicks across Heatstroke Central, with maybe hostile aliens in orbit, and you're still not walking right. I can manage. You shouldn't. I will. Corin rubbed his temples. You do realize this is a terrible plan. Do you have a better one? I was very close to naming my cactus and pretending I didn't see the fireball. That plan involved zero risk of disintegration. Zura started packing her gear. He sighed. All right. But we're taking the crawler. She glanced at him. That pile of rust. Excuse you, that pile of rust is a lovingly customized, barely functioning, semi-legal terrain vehicle with a flamethrower grill. I see. He grinned. You're not impressed. I'm wondering why it hasn't exploded yet. Well, he said, picking up his toolkit, that's the miracle of selective ignorance. The crawler groaned to life like a dying beast. Panels clanked. Something in the rear vent hissed smoke with the enthusiasm of an angry cat. Corin slammed the hatch shut behind them and buckled into the driver's seat. Welcome to Crawler 1, he said. All exits are clearly marked. In the event of sudden immolation, please scream loudly. Zura gave him a long look. He grinned wider. You're warming up to me. I'm adapting. They rumbled over the cracked terrain, passing wind-scoured rock formations and the bleached remains of a downed drone that might have once belonged to a mining survey. The sky above shimmered oddly now, still blue, but veined with subtle streaks of violet, like bruises on the air. Does your sky always look like it's about to apologize? Only when something's watching, Corin said. Zura didn't comment on that. She kept her eyes on the horizon, scanning with a handheld receiver that occasionally pinged with faint echoes. After an hour, the crawler's nav display fuzzed and blinked out entirely. Oh, now you give up, Corin muttered, smacking the screen. I'll guide us, Zura said. Please tell me your sense of direction is better than your bedside manner. It is. Then I'll try not to drive us directly into a sandpit. They drove in silence for a while, broken only by the occasional growl of the engine and the soft warble of the receiver. Then Zura said, Why do you really live out here? Corin didn't answer immediately. She glanced at him. You dodge the question. I dodge lots of things. Missiles, responsibilities, emotional intimacy. Corin. He drummed his fingers on the steering wheel. I was part of a cleanup team during the final push, he said finally. We were supposed to secure a communications outpost. Thought it was abandoned. It was. Zura waited. There were civilians inside, a whole group, scientists, families we didn't know. He swallowed. By the time we figured it out, someone had already called in the strike. No one called it off. Zura looked away, not with pity, just distance. I got out with a limp and a medal, Corin said. Didn't feel like celebrating. So I came here. A long pause. Zura said softly, that happened on Icarus Theta. He blinked. Yeah, how'd you? I was monitoring intercepts during that period. The Alari flagged the incident as a war crime. They assumed you meant to destroy the facility. Corin exhaled slowly. Of course they did. Zura didn't speak again, but something shifted between them. A silent, shared understanding, grief with different names. They reached the ridge as the second sun dipped below the horizon. The terrain grew jagged, crawling with iron-veined rock. Zura pointed to a narrow crevice in the cliffside. There. Corin parked the crawler and grabbed a light. You sure this isn't a cave that just really wants to kill us? Zura slid out silently, clutching her gear. Only one way to find out. I was afraid you'd say that. The crevice was narrow, but just wide enough to crawl through. After a few meters, it opened into a chamber lined with ancient-looking panels. Alari tech, old even by their standards. The relay sat embedded in the wall, half buried in stone. It glowed faintly at their approach, like it recognized Zura. Corin stood back. I assume you have a secret handshake or something. Zura approached it slowly, pressed her palm to a panel. The relay responded. Lights pulsed. A soft tone filled the air. Then static. Lines of code flickered, then a voice. Unit Z3A status compromised, data retrieval pending. Mission, override directive. Zura stiffened, override directive. The voice repeated. Directive confirmed, eliminator en route. Estimated arrival 2 hours. Corin looked at her. That doesn't sound like a care package. No, she said, it's a kill team. Right, he said, so. I guess it's a really good thing I brought the flamethrower grill. Corin was running diagnostics on the crawler's weapons system, which mostly involved thumping the dashboard and swearing at a screen that had last been updated during the mineral rights skirmishes of 2189. Outside, the desert wind had begun to pick up again, brushing across the jagged cliffside like a warning breath. Inside the chamber, Zura remained still, her hand on the relay panel, eyes scanning the string of commands now glowing steadily across its surface. All right, Corin muttered, ducking back through the crevice into the cave. Good news is the flamethrower spins up. Bad news is it does that on its own now. Zura didn't look up. We don't have time to fix it. I figured. You want me to put together a will, or are we just skipping straight to the poetic last words? She tapped something on the relay, and a holographic projection flickered to life, 3 blinking points converging from orbit, slowly descending. The Eliminator Unit, fast movers, high orbit to surface entry, estimated time to arrival 91 minutes. Corin stared at the countdown. I'm starting to think your people have a very aggressive approach to HR issues. Zura stepped back from the relay. We can't fight them head-on. Well, I wasn't exactly planning a heroic last stand, Corin said. I was thinking more along the lines of run away very fast and scream a lot. They'll scan for my biometrics. They'll trace residual traces from the memory shard, the relay, the bunker. Can we scramble your signal? I can dampen it briefly, but not indefinitely. Corin paced. All right, we need decoys, distraction, cover, and distance. Maybe even an EMP charge if I can get the crawler to not kill us when we plug one in. Zura pulled a sleek disc-shaped device from her armor. This is a tactical distortion node, short range. I can plant it near the relay. It will scramble their scans for 5 minutes. Corin blinked. You've had that this whole time. I didn't want to waste it unless necessary. We're about to be turned into abstract art by people with plasma blades. I think now qualifies. She nodded, but we need more than misdirection. You thinking ambush? No, I'm thinking bait. He stared. No offense, but I'm usually the one bringing reckless ideas to the table. Zura activated the node, setting its timer. The shard's data will pull them here. But once it triggers the next command cycle, I can erase it, make the lead disappear. Corin's brow furrowed, and you can do that remotely. I'll need line of sight. So, you want to lure them in, get close enough to pull the rug out, and vanish before they stab you. Yes. Well, that's very on brand for us at this point. She gave him a faint glance. I'll plant the distortion, you prep the crawler. Oh joy, he muttered. Can't wait to pilot the creaking Deathtrap Express. By the time they rolled away from the relay site, the ridge behind them looked undisturbed. A small shimmer marked the distortion node's position, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. The crawler buzzed with stressed circuits, rattling every time it crested a dune. Corin had patched the auxiliary shields with kitchen foil and hope. They took a long arc southward, aiming for an abandoned mining outpost listed on the crawler's ancient maps. It was mostly buried under shifting sands, but the external relay towers were still standing, enough to bounce fake signals and trick a scan sweep. Zura configured the bait. Once the eliminators descend, they'll triangulate the shard's signal and pursue. If they lose track, they'll spread and sweep. Like angry bees with orbital clearance, Corin said. She didn't ask what bees were. She was learning. Corin helped set up the relay spoof, routing it through what was left of the mining rig's data skeleton. The signal would pulse every 8 minutes, mimicking the shard's emission, jumping position by 0. 2 degrees each time, a fake trail through the lower canyons. Zura handed him a small handheld detonator. If we're intercepted before we lose them, trigger this. It will fry the spoof. Got it. So we let them chase the ghost signal, and we duck out the back. They'll realize it's a trap eventually. But hopefully after, we're sipping freeze-dried cocktails somewhere quiet. Zura tilted her head. What's a cocktail? Artificial fruit and bad decisions. They watched the night sky from inside the crawler. 3 tiny lights flared briefly in the upper atmosphere, then vanished. No sound, no visible craft. Here we go, Corin whispered. Zura slid her rifle into her lap and stared out the side viewport. If they find the real relay, we're out of time. They won't, you said it right. They're trained to anticipate misdirection. Corin leaned back. So are we. She looked at him then long and hard like she was weighing something. You trust too easily, she said. He gave a lopsided grin. Nah, I just pretend I do. Makes people underestimate me. Very useful when you're not good at anything else. Your self-deprecation is oddly specific. It's my second language. They waited, breathing in stale, recycled air and counting the seconds. Then, on the crawler's feed motion, 3 figures. Humanoid but larger, their armor sleek and black with no visible seams. Their faces obscured behind featureless helms. They moved like wraiths, unnaturally smooth. Zura tensed. Visual confirms, Eliminator class. High tensile exoforms, adaptive shielding, minimal human error potential. Fantastic, Corin said. We're up against death ninjas from space. Got it. The Eliminators split formation and began scanning the area. One approached the distortion shimmer. Zura's hand hovered over a secondary switch on her belt. Then the shimmer pulsed. The Eliminator paused. A moment passed. It moved on. Zura exhaled. They took the bait. Corin leaned closer to the screen. Come on, you beautiful monsters, chase the ghost. The other 2 turned toward the signal spoof. One launched a recon drone that zipped through the air like a bullet with wings. It streaked past the outpost and disappeared into the canyons. Time to go, Zura said, already sliding into the driver's seat. Wait, you're driving. You wired the controls backwards. I'm better at compensating. That's very hurtful, Corin muttered, buckling in. The crawler shot out over the ridge and turned hard west, the engine screaming in protest. Behind them, the Eliminators vanished into the dunes, chasing a phantom that no longer existed. For now. As they tore across the cracked flats, Corin looked over at her. All right, let's say we survive this. You get your name cleared, you get back to your people. What then? Zura didn't answer at first. Then, I don't know. You're not the first soldier who lost the war and didn't know how to stop fighting. I don't want to stop fighting. He blinked. Then what do you want? She looked ahead, golden eyes catching the glint of starlight on metal. To choose what I fight for. The crawler roared into the dark, 2 fugitives chasing the last trail of truth across a dying moon, with jokes between them and doom behind. They didn't speak for the first 20 kilometers, mostly because the crawler made a sound somewhere between a dying walrus and a blender chewing gravel, and also because Corin was busy watching the power levels sink like a bad mood. Okay, he finally said, glancing at the energy gauge as it dipped into the orange. This is either going to turn into a triumphant escape or the world's slowest chase scene ending in mechanical betrayal. Zura was scanning a handheld display. There's an outpost ahead, industrial era, abandoned. You sure it's not, say, occupied by rogue scavengers with a taste for human femurs? She raised an eyebrow. Are your femurs especially valuable? Exceptionally average, but I've grown attached. Zura didn't respond to the joke. Her gaze remained fixed on the small map flickering between glitches. The site's architecture has power conduits, possibly a recharging node. See, silver lining. He knocked on the dash. You hear that, crawler? You live to rattle another day. The outpost came into view an hour later. 3 slanted towers like rotting teeth, surrounded by a low perimeter wall buried in dunes. Rust had chewed through most of the structure, but one solar panel was still catching the last of the twin sun's rays, blinking like a lazy lighthouse. They pulled up beside a broken gate. Zura stepped out first, weapon ready, her long ears twitching slightly as she scanned the perimeter. Corin followed, stretching his back. I give that crawler 3 more hours of life, Max. Maybe 4 if we feed it compliments. Zura motioned him toward the nearest structure. There, a generator alcove. The entrance door groaned open under her hand. Inside, they found a room half-choked with sand, its walls lined with hollowed-out fuse ports and brittle wires. But tucked in the corner was a forgotten recharge station, half-buried, dusty, but intact. Corin whistled. I take it all back. This place is a paradise. Zura began hooking up cables from the crawler's power core. It will take at least 40 minutes. Which is, what 10 years in being chased by assassin squad time. She adjusted a dial, roughly. Corin dug through the supply locker, found a packet of emergency rations that looked like it had lost a fight with time and flavor. He held one up. You hungry? Zura glanced over. Is that food? I'm legally obligated to say yes. She took the packet, turned it over, sniffed it once and said nothing more. They sat outside near the wall, backs to the wind. The crawler hummed softly in the background, cables twitching as it drank from the outpost's ancient veins. The stars had begun to emerge, sharp, clear, and utterly alien. Zura spoke first. When I was a child, I trained in a facility with 600 others. We were sorted by neural efficiency and discipline markers. Corin blinked. That's one way to start a bedtime story. We weren't permitted names at first. Only numbers, designations. I was Z3A. He waited. One day I hesitated during a simulation. I chose not to eliminate a target. It was a test. I failed. And they let you live. They tried to reassign me. Cognitive retraining, I escaped. Corin gave a low whistle. You escaped from a hyper-disciplined alien military academy. She nodded once. Remind me never to play cards with you. Zura looked up at the stars. It took me years to understand that compassion wasn't weakness, that it could be chosen, refined, made stronger. That's the thing no one tells you, Corin said. Courage isn't about pulling the trigger. It's about knowing when not to. She looked at him for a long moment, as if studying the shape of that truth. Then, unexpectedly, she said, I still think about that simulation. I still see the face of the one I spared. Do you know what happened to them? No. You think it mattered? Zura's voice was quiet. I hope so. They lapsed into silence again. Then Corin said, So, if we make it out of this alive, I say we open a diner. She blinked. A what? A food place. Greasy floors, bad lighting, worse coffee. You wear an apron. I run the cash register. We argue about prices. Zura's lips twitched. You believe I would wear an apron? I think you'd wear the hell out of an apron. You de-scare customers into tipping better. She looked amused. And this is your dream. I've had worse. Some involved clowns, others involved unpaid taxes. The crawler beeped, a steady, rising tone. Zura stood immediately. Charge complete. Corin brushed off his jacket, back to the chase. They packed fast, rebooted the crawler and turned west. The signal from the relay had long gone dark. If the eliminators had figured out the deception, there was no sign yet. But Zura's posture had shifted, tense, alert, waiting. Corin noticed. You feel something. They're close. Define close. Like knocking politely close or we're already doomed close. Zura checked a side monitor. They've split into search sectors. One's tracking residual ion output. They're guessing, but they're narrowing the field. He drummed the steering wheel. Okay, so what do we have left? I have 2 active countermeasures and an uplink beacon. Wait, uplink, you can call someone. Zura nodded. If I calibrate it manually, I can transmit a secure burst. To who? She hesitated. An old contact, one of the few who might still believe I'm not a traitor. Corin gave a short laugh. Well, that's refreshing, a twist of hope for once. Zura worked quickly, pulling the beacon module from her pack and setting it on the dashboard. She connected it to the crawler's comm node. If we transmit now, it could draw attention. How long would it take for them to respond? Uncertain, but if they do, we might have a way off this world. Corin reached for the ignition switch. Then we better find a place to hide until they do. Zura scanned the terrain ahead. There's a canyon system 2 hours northwest, narrow but shielded from orbital scan. Perfect, he said, turning the crawler's nose toward the horizon. Remind me to name one of those canyons after you. I already have a designation. Yeah, but Z3A's gorge doesn't really scream tourist attraction. The crawler sped into the dark. Behind them, high above the scorched landscape, something flickered, silent, watching. The hunt was still on, but so was the race. And somewhere out there, maybe, someone still listened. The crawler's suspension was designed for light terrain and casual planetary survey, not for rock-strewn canyons with the temperament of a bad-tempered rhino. Every few seconds, the chassis lurched sideways or groaned ominously, prompting Corin to mutter a series of increasingly creative apologies to the vehicle. Was this canyon system designed by an angry deity with no regard for shocks? He grumbled as they rounded a jagged outcrop and nearly lost a side panel. Zura, braced in the passenger seat, remained completely unfazed. You're doing fine. That's what people say before the crash footage goes viral. We're not being followed. That we know of. Somewhere up there, I'm sure one of your shiny death pals is licking their scanner and thinking, that rock's suspiciously sarcastic. Your sense of danger is unique. I try to keep it casual, helps with the ulcers. They slowed near, a narrow crevice flanked by mineral columns that pulsed faintly under the dim sky. A whispering wind curled between the formations, and occasional flashes of light flickered across the canyon walls, auroras caught in stone. Zura studied them. Geothermal residue. This area's rich in conductive minerals. It'll shield our signal well. Great, so it's beautiful and paranoid-proof, like you really. She tilted her head. That was almost a compliment. Give me time, I'm evolving. They set up camp inside a shallow cave that overlooked the canyon floor. The crawler's external sensors were still pinging a clear radius, and the uplink beacon hummed faintly under a tarp in the back, pulsing once every 30 seconds like a heartbeat trying to be brave. Corin sat cross-legged on a flat rock, prying open a sealed container of powdered stew with the enthusiasm of a man about to eat sand and shame. Zura leaned against the wall, idly rotating a small, glowing cube between her fingers. Do Ilari cuisine options always involve cubes? He asked, because we've got a lot of sharp corners going on. Zura glanced at the ration he held. Yours smells like thermoplastic. Thanks. I like my food mildly toxic and impossible to identify. Builds character. She watched him chew in silence for a moment. You're not what I expected of a human soldier. He coughed. Wow. Are you saying I'm disappointing and underwhelming? I mean, she said, you're strange, you make jokes, you hesitate. I also scream at insects, but let's save that charming detail for another day. Zura turned the cube in her hand. Humor as a coping mechanism. Is that typical for your species? Well, he said, scooping up another bite of unidentifiable goo. We don't have psychic weapons or nerve-linked armor, so yeah, mostly jokes and caffeine. She smiled slightly. See, that's almost a laugh. You keep this up, you'll be fully corrupted by the end of the week. Her gaze turned thoughtful. Do you think this signal will reach anyone? Corin looked toward the beacon. I think the universe has a weird way of listening when you least expect it. So maybe. That's not very scientific. No, but it's a good plot device. He offered her some of his stew. She took a tiny bite, winced, and said nothing. Corin took that as a glowing review. Later, while Zura recalibrated the beacon's alignment with eerie, alien precision, Corin ran a full diagnostic on the crawler. Power levels stable. Weapon systems dormant. Engine temperature. Suspiciously high but not quite explosive. A win by his standards. Then the long-range motion sensor chirped. One blip, brief, east quadrant. Zura snapped to attention. Visual. Corin tapped the interface. Negative, could have been an animal. Wind glitch. She narrowed her eyes. Or a scout. Well, if it was a scout, it forgot to leave a calling card. Zura checked the terrain map. No clean escape routes. We'd bottleneck if we tried to flee. We could always hide under the tarp and pretend to be furniture. She gave him the look. He raised his hands, just brainstorming. But minutes passed with no further motion, no blips. The silence stretched long enough to make the wind feel louder. Then nothing, stillness. Zura finally stepped back from the console. False alarm. Or a really indecisive enemy. She sat down across from him, her back to the wall. The beacon continued its soft pulse between them. I keep thinking about the people who trained with me, she said quietly. What they became, who I became. Corin leaned forward. You're not them. But I could have been. Yeah, he said. And I could have been one of the guys who pushed the launch button without thinking twice. They sat in the glow of the uplink, not quite warmth, not quite peace. Finally, Corin said, what happens if your contact does answer? Zura hesitated. Then I give them everything I've gathered. The memory shard, the relay data, my own logs. And they believe you. They'll try. And if they do, then I'll still have tried. He smiled faintly. You sound like me now. That's either inspiring or deeply concerning. The beacon's pulse flickered once, twice, then glowed brighter, a different color, sharp and steady. Zura bolted upright. Corin blinked. Did it just answer? She ran to the interface, fingers flying across the controls. Glyphs bloomed in the air, unreadable to him but clearly urgent. It's them, she breathed. Secure channel, identity confirmed. They're 30 minutes out, stealth orbit. Corin stood too fast and hit his head on the roof. Ow, okay, all right, great news, we're saved. Or about to be shot by a very stealthy misunderstanding. Zura didn't answer immediately. They want coordinates for extraction, she said. But they're wary. They've received reports that I've been compromised. You want to reassure them. Tell them I've been feeding you expired human food for days. She keyed in a response. They'll send a drop shuttle, small craft, minimal trace. Corin exhaled. All right, so we sit tight, try not to make noise, hope no one else noticed. Zura nodded. And pray the eliminators don't show up first. I think I used up my prayers back in basic training, Corin muttered. I asked the universe for a promotion and ended up on latrine duty. Zura turned to him. If they do come first. They won't. But if they do, we'll handle it, he said, together. She watched him for a long beat. Then just loud enough to be heard over the wind. Thank you. Corin blinked. Whoa, did you just express gratitude? I'm evolving, she said. Okay, now I'm scared. Above them the stars shimmered. A faint ripple curved across the sky, too small to be seen by ordinary eyes but just enough to signal that something was coming. Something fast, something quiet. They didn't sleep that night. But for the first time in days, they didn't feel completely alone. The drop shuttle came at dawn. Not in a thunderous roar of thrusters or blazing light, but as a whisper on the horizon, barely a shimmer against the rising sun, like a ghost skipping across the canyon air. It hovered for a breath, just long enough to disturb the dust, then touched down behind a curve of rock that concealed its profile. Zura was already up, armor sealed, weapons holstered but close. Corin, less graceful, was frantically stuffing the last of their supplies into a duffel that had seen better centuries. Didn't think our space Uber would show up early, he said. I was counting on one last existential nap. They're cautious, Zura replied, watching the shuttle. They didn't broadcast an open code, just one pulse and a landing. Maybe they read your Yelp reviews. She shot him a look, then stepped toward the ship with calm, deliberate strides. Corin followed, slightly less calm and considerably more deliberate, like someone approaching a very expensive machine that might shoot him out of sheer paranoia. The shuttle door hissed open. Inside stood 3 Alari, taller than Zura, armor sleeker, eyes covered by narrow visors that gleamed faintly. None raised weapons, but none moved to welcome them either. The one in the center stepped forward. Z3A. Zura inclined her head. My name is Zura now. There was a pause. Then the figure reached up, removed their visor, and revealed an older face marked with silver tracery, a web of neural interface lines that pulsed softly under the skin. I am Telix, former commander of the Ninth Echo Command. We served together. Zura nodded slowly. You received the data. We did. Telix glanced at Corin, then back. It matches none of the High Command's claims. That's because they were lies. Yes, a pause, but some will believe them, others will not. Corin cleared his throat. Hi, sorry to interrupt this very dramatic moment, but if anyone was wondering, I'm just the local idiot who helped. Unarmed. Relatively clean. Mild body odor, definitely not a threat. Telix raised one eyebrow. You're human. Guilty as charged. Although in my defense, I didn't volunteer for galactic politics. I was just trying to fix a crawler, and ended up co-starring in a spy thriller. Zura almost smiled. Almost. Telix stepped aside. We'll take you off-world, both of you, but there will be questions, trials. I'm used to being on trial, Zura said. This time I'll speak for myself. They boarded the shuttle. Corin blinked at the sterile interior, all smooth metal curves and quiet humming panels. He found a seat that didn't look like it, doubled as a medical table and strapped in. Smells like antiseptic and paranoia in here. Zura sat beside him. It's safer than where we were. I missed the crawler already. Sure, it rattled, but it had character, like a drunk toaster. As the shuttle lifted, the canyon slipped beneath them, once vast and looming, now small and winding like veins in an ancient hand. Corin pressed his face to the window. You ever think about how weird it is? He said. We went from trying to kill each other to this. Zura didn't respond immediately. I think about it constantly. I mean, don't get me wrong. I've had strange relationships before. But weapons drawn at first meeting is a new one. Zura leaned back, her eyes closed. You taught me something important. Corin looked skeptical. How to make terrible jokes under pressure. Know how to stop running. He blinked. Well, that's unexpectedly touching. I was going to say you taught me how to dismantle alien armor without getting electrocuted, but your thing sounds more noble. I was taught that survival required isolation. That vulnerability was weakness. But you, she opened her eyes and looked at him. You were clumsy, chaotic, and completely transparent. I'm gonna assume that's a compliment. It is. The shuttle punched through the atmosphere and the stars welcomed them like old friends. A larger vessel waited in orbit, sleek, dark, silent. A shape built not for war but for watching. Docking was smooth. Corin barely had time to fumble with his straps before the interior lights shifted and a soft chime announced arrival. Telix met them at the airlock, holding a data slate. We've transmitted your evidence to multiple archives, he said. Neutral systems. If the Council wants to erase you, they'll have to erase half the galaxy's information net. Zura nodded. Good. Corin stepped out after her. Quick question. Do your archives carry comedy films? I'm gonna need something to decompress after all this espionage. There are entertainment sectors aboard. Bless you. Zura turned to him. You don't have to stay, you know. They can send you back to Earth. He looked around, then down at his feet, then back at her. You're going to need someone who knows how to fix rusted crawler engines, quote bad movies, and panic in high-stakes situations. I'm not saying I'm essential, but I bring a certain ambience. She raised an eyebrow. So you'll stay. Someone has to make sure you don't forget how to smile. A rare, faint smile actually crossed her lips. Telix cleared his throat. We'll begin debriefs shortly. Prepare yourselves. As they walked down the corridor together, her stride steady, his slightly out of sync, Corin said, So, after the trials, the hearings, the bureaucratic circus, what then? Zura considered it. Maybe I'll find others who chose like I did, start something new, a coalition, a refuge, a rebel diner, a safe place for outcasts, for survivors, even for clumsy humans. He grinned. Sounds like a great name for a bar. The corridor opened into a wide viewing bay, starlight pouring through the curved glass. Below, the planet spun, a small dot in an infinite sky. Corin stood beside her, arms crossed. You know. It's weird. What? I thought I'd be scared. Leaving home. Floating in a ship full of aliens, fugitives, and people who think smiling is a tactical weakness. But I'm not. Why? Because for the first time, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. Zura looked at him, long ears catching the subtle shimmer of the stars. So do I. They stood there in silence, two soldiers who had once faced each other across a battlefield, now shoulder to shoulder, watching a new future unfold through the endless dark. And somewhere deep in the ship, buried beneath layers of alien code and ancient systems, the last flicker of the memory shard blinked off. No longer hiding, no longer running, just beginning.